welcome to the ryoknits podcast. My name is Rhiannon. I am a knitter. I've been knitting about 6 years now. So welcome to my YouTube channel. If you've been here before, it's great to see you again. I noticed I had a few new subscribers in the last month or so, and so I thought I would just give you a little overview, who I am, what I'm about. So my name's Rhiannon. I'm a 30-something living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Up until very recently, I was living in Portland, Oregon. I am married and I live here with my wife and our cat, Miso. You can find me on Instagram as ryoknits. I am also still on Ravelry as Rhiannon, capital R, and then O, capital O. Rhiannon O. And the Rio is just my initials, so very creative. That's what ryoknits means. That's a little bit about me. So settle in. This is going to be my last podcast of the year 2021, and I would say it has flown by, but honestly, it has not. It feels like it has been dragging, and I feel almost like nothing about the holiday season and the turning of the new year. And I think it's just that kind of second pandemic winter. It's really hard to be enthusiastic about things when, one, you're just not, experiencing things the same way. So everything is different, right? I think, even like grocery stores though aren't playing as much holiday music. I think a lot of people are feeling sort of like, it's just going to be winter. We're actually going to be celebrating the sort of Christmas, if you will, when my mother-in-law comes in February. So fingers crossed that air travel still feels like a reasonable thing to do at that time. And also fingers crossed that I find a little holiday spirit before then. But what I'm up to right now and what I want to share with you today is sort of like an end of the year kind of wrapping it all up. So in terms of knitting, I will say my finished objects and my works in progress feel like a big undifferentiated mass right now. So I will just show you what I have. And I also wanted to, in this episode, talk about kind of like end of the year book roundup, what I'm reading, because I do talk about books a lot, and maybe a little bit of 2022 preview stuff. So let's jump in. Okay, I'm just going to be pulling things from a pile. I have a couple baskets here of whips and tools, and like I said, it's kind of undifferentiated right now. So here's the first thing I have to show you. So as you can see, I have not trimmed the ends. I wove it in, but I didn't trim it. I haven't blocked this yet, but this is the Dipole Beanie by Chinua Matthews, who is a newer designer and makes very kind of wearable, cool stuff. So this is a hat that looks very strange before you fold it up. Here's what it is. And it looks very big because it is a little bit 2D at the top. So it's a bit like a sock, really. But when you block it, I think is when you kind of like manipulate the shape a little bit. So this is designed to have a tri-fold brim. So you fold it up once, you fold it up twice, and I think I'm gonna have to tack it down to just keep it in place because I don't ever plan on having it unfolded. But you end up with then a really thick brim, and so the actual body of the hat is really not much longer than the brim. So I'm going to put it on and just kind of show you what it would look like if, when it's all done. So it's big, it's slouchy, and it's going to be really warm because I'm going to have 3 layers of fabric over my ears, which is why I chose this hat. So yeah, it's just gonna be a really nice winter for that kind of like deep winter when it gets, supposedly at some point Wisconsin gets really cold and blanketed in snow. I haven't seen it yet, but I believe it because I've seen it on TV. And I don't think people are lying to me. But yeah, it's just got a really nice thick brim, so you can see maybe a little bit that the edges want to roll up even inside, so I have kind of a lump right there. That's why I want to like tack it down too. But what I like about it is that it gives you just a little bit of slouch, but not like a ridiculous, you know, that like hipster thing of perching a hat on top of your head. I don't like this. I'm not a gnome. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to do that. I just want enough room that it's not going to crush my hair, but also I want my ears warm. Hats that don't cover my ears don't exist in my world. They're dead to me. They're nothing. So yeah, so that's my Dipole beanie. And I knit this, I talked about the yarn before. This is total mystery yarn. I bought it from a destash sale, which means the store, a local yarn store in Portland, Oregon, used to host a Labor Day destash sale. I don't know if she'll do it again, but Pearl Fiber Arts, in case you're wondering. And she would just let people kind of bring in their yarn, put it in a Ziploc bag, label it, say what you want to make, you know, what do you want to sell it for? So I got 2 skeins of sport weight that somebody, I think it was just someone's dyeing experiment, and got it for $5. And I was really surprised that nobody, or that the person was getting rid of it, because the only explanation for why it was only $5 on there was that it just said a single word, splotches. So I think that this really cool, these blips of color, that's what I call them, blips. I think that's it. I think they were aiming for a more uniform color and they didn't get it. And they were unhappy with the results. And so this ended up in a destash sale. One man's trash is another man's treasure. I love this yarn, and I've been just kind of sitting on it, not knowing what to do with it for many years. So here it is, you know, proof that something that you stash and don't know what to do with might end up as a finished object 4 years down the road. So yeah, my first finished object, and this is, again, this hat looks ginormous, but when I put it on, I think you can see it's really not that big. Okay, I'm gonna try to get through my project really quickly, but I need to remember to hydrate. I'll put my water right in front of me. The next project, and this is something that has been on the needles for well over a year. This may be my longest running whip of all time. This is the Secret of Life pullover by Marzena Kolacek. I'll have to double check that. But essentially it is partially done. I still need to pick up and knit a collar, and I need to knit the cuffs. Because it's all over cabled and so everything is charted, I got to a spot on the first sleeve where I thought this might be long enough, and I just sort of left it on waste yarn, knit the other sleeve to that point, put it on waste yarn, blocked it to see if it would grow for length, and then yeah, and that's where I'm at now. So I still have a long way to go with this. Let's see if I can demonstrate some of the work I need to do on this. So here it is on, and you can see that it is a kind of a boxy fit, drop shoulder. It's got cables all over, and now you know why it's taking me several years to do this. I mean, this stinking sweater, I mean, you start with cables. Like, the very first stitches you do after you're cast on are cables. Row 1, cables. And it's not like one cable that repeats across, right? This is a 16 stitch cable. This is a, I don't know, 8 stitch cable, maybe 6. This is an 8 stitch cable, you know, I mean, it's just like cables, 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 cables. But so I had bound it off at a length that I thought would look really good with skirts and things like that. So not quite cropped, but shorter. And then I blocked it when I had it done. As you can see, sleeves are plenty long enough and will be with cuffs done. Then I blocked it and I put it on and I was like, you know, this drop shoulder thing, this drapey thing, in a cropped sweater, I don't really find that especially flattering. Because I feel like with the cables, it kind of sucks into the waist. It doesn't hang straight down. So it doesn't look boxy on a sweater. So it kind of just looks like a sweater that's too short and also kind of too long for a short sweater. So I think I'm gonna have to actually undo this bottom edge and add some inches. And I think I'm gonna add about 5 to 6 inches. So that would be probably 2 or 3 chart repeats. And I will not be finishing exactly where, you know, you're supposed to finish in the pattern. I think I'll just finish where the length feels right. So I have a ways to go with this one, but I wanted to give an update because it is coming along, and I really am fed up with cables. I am so fed up with cables because of this sweater, because it has just been on the needles forever, and I kind of go back and forth even looking at it, where before I blocked it, I was like, do I even like this anymore? I mean, the color doesn't make sense. But then I put it on and I thought, no, it actually is really pretty. I mean, it is a really pretty green, you know, it's somewhere between like a mossy green and I don't know, it's a good color. It's also just kind of like so much freaking work, and green is not my favorite color, and it's also a very kind of heavy warm sweater. So yeah, I'm feeling like the only way I'm gonna know if I love this or not is if I really give it the full treatment that it deserves, because I know that I won't love it at this length. So I'm gonna have to just take out that bottom edge and add a few more inches, or, you know, a few more chart repeats. And when it's more of a tunic length, then I think it will fit maybe what my original vision for it was. The intended length of the pattern is never really what I base length off of, because I always tend to like my sweaters a little bit longer than what a pattern says to do. Whether I'm doing it, you know, for a high-waisted kind of, or, you know, natural waisted skirt kind of outfit, or like jeans, which I don't wear jeans. I don't really wear high-waisted jeans. I wear like normal rise jeans, I guess, because I feel like it's a completely different look. But yeah, I have a long ways to go with this, and I'm even sort of not sure how I feel about it. What do you think? I would love to hear what you think, because I could walk away from this. I could just walk away from it and say, lesson learned. You know, it's been kind of a long story, but essentially I knit like a whole other sweater out of this yarn and then frogged it because it didn't work, and then started over. So, you know, when you get that feeling of like, but I've put so much into this. Also, it's all over cables, so I really have put so much into it. But yeah, I just don't know. I'm sort of not loving the color. That's the first thing. I'm also kind of just generally unsure how drop shoulder things work for me, for my shape. And I think that's where I'm like, you know, making it the tunic length, I'll know for sure if that changes it, because I think that, again, when it pulls in at your waist and it's a drop shoulder, it's, in my mind, just doesn't look great. But if it then has to pull back out because of, you know, hips and lower half stretching, the garment will look completely different, right? The shape of, like, it'll have more shape. And I do think there's like a ton of, there is a ton of ease, but you don't always see that when cables are kind of sucking in. And then it just sort of looks like maybe it's like not a great fit because it kind of wrinkles up and you get these like weird, like wrinkly bits. I don't know. I would love to hear what you think about this sweater. Yeah, just thoughts on like abandoning projects overall, because I am getting really close with many things. Okay, so I'm back in my cozy classic raglan, which is what I have been, what I was wearing before. This is a pattern I made oversized, and along the lines of what I was saying about the drop shoulder and maybe not fitting great, I'm starting to think that I tend to pick sizes that are too large. And then when I actually see it like on camera or in a photo, I'm like, there's a lot of extra fabric on there. Maybe I need to go down a size when I'm knitting. But this sweater is so damn comfortable, I really couldn't give a shit, like, if it doesn't look good. Oh yeah, and this is a swearing friendly podcast. I do swear. I don't have time to police myself, or I don't have the energy to police myself. So yeah, if your ears are sensitive, this might not be for you. Just putting that out there. So I had posted a picture on Instagram of another sweater that is green, that is a work in progress, and that I have actually decided to just abandon. It is the piece of silver. It's a kind of a funnel neck or turtleneck, fold over, whatever, raglan with just a very simple detail on it. And it's olive green. I was using the knitting for olive merino, so it's a light fingering weight. And everything about that sweater, I feel like it made sense when I lived in Portland. So like the weight of it using light fingering yarn, it made sense at that point. And having something in that color, I don't know, something about like the light, the way the light is in different places. I'm just like not feeling that color anymore for me. And I will say this Secret of Life is a much more vibrant green, so I'm still okay with this color, although I don't wear a lot of green. Like, I never buy anything green. So that's kind of my first hint that, like, if there were you know, things for sale, something for sale that I wanted, I would first choose blue. Then I would probably choose like black or gray and red. Those are the colors I would gravitate towards. Maybe a purple or a pink if it was the right shade. But green is just not a color I gravitate towards. And yeah, it's weird. It's not even one of those colors that like I've come to kind of embrace the fact that I do like certain shades of brown. I think brown can be brown purple, or it can be kind of like brown gray, and I really like those. I just don't, I never go for green. So I have 2 green sweaters that I've been working on, and I'm just not sure with this one. And with the piece of silver, I just know, I'm like, I don't want this. I don't want to deal with it. So it's in essentially a timeout until I figure out how I'm going to dispose of it. Which, you know, I don't want to just, I never want to just throw something away. I don't want to frog it because I feel like I don't really want to use that yarn again. It's wonderful yarn, but the color is wrong. So you know, there's that, and it's too thin. I don't think I really have a use for that thin of a yarn. And it's a perfectly great sweater, and I think if somebody wanted to take over it and finish it, that would be the ideal situation. Mohair strikes again. Another project that I am sort of questioning is the DeMerknan mitts. And I guess I think I'm just not excited about them right now. And I think I will eventually go back and get excited again. But it has to do with the thumb placement. So it is a really beautiful motif. I like that, but the thumb is, for whatever reason, when the glove is laid flat and the front and back are separated according to the pattern, you see the thumb is coming off the front. My thumb comes off the side of my hand, and I can see how it is a little more forward than back, but really my thumb comes off the side of my hand. So I have to rip back to probably about there before the thumb gusset and really rethink the placement, and I'm just not looking forward to that because I want it to be up higher on the glove, and I also want it to be more to the side, because what is the point of having a front panel and a back panel if the placement of the thumb is going to cause the entire thing to rotate, so that what you're really getting is the front plus a little bit of back minus a little bit of front, and then, you know, the back with a little bit of the front and not the whole back. So yeah, this pattern has been interesting because I feel like in my last episode I talked more about like all the great things about it, so there's a lot of great stuff about it, but then it also has some very strange things. So that is that, and I just throw the project bags on the floor because that's kind of how I feel. So my next project that is on the needles is a pair of scrappy socks that I am sort of considering scrappy Christmas socks. They're kind of Christmassy. It's green, there's red, white, whatever. So I've been knitting this with just 3 kind of leftover sock yarns. Let's see if I can remember what they are. I feel like this one is possibly knitted with, and it's called, I remember the color was called something like Winter Berries, or Snowy Winter Berries. This is some Malabrigo sock from Deep Stash that honestly I probably got from someone else, like a friend who gave me some her leftovers. So and then this is a Classic Elites yarn, kind of a tonal green that I knit some socks for my spouse with. Yeah, so I'm gonna do an afterthought heel. It's just a way to kind of use up scrap yarns, but something that I thought was interesting is how the Malabrigo is such a finer yarn, and this one is such a plump yarn that even though they're all fingering weight, oh boy, it's falling all over. You can really see how much it sucks in where I use that and then expands out, right? Like the gauge changes even on the same size needle. I just thought that was interesting, and I'm not worried about that. I think it will block out, and it's going on my feet. No one's gonna see it. So here's the other sock done. I do want to redo the heel because I think I just made it a bit too shallow. But it's all part of me kind of figuring out what my favorite way to do heels on socks is. And in the spirit of that, I did a pair of Christmas socks out of West Yorkshire Spinners signature 4-ply. So this is like a classic Christmas colorway called Candy Cane, and it's just a self-striping that does green, white, red, white, green, white, red, white. So there's my leftovers. It's really probably more than half of it left over. I have kind of small feet and I like short socks, so I often get 2 pairs and then some out of a skein of yarn. So the first sock I did was a pattern, a free pattern, I think by Tanis Lavallee, who is Tanis Fiber Arts. She has this sock pattern called Trusty Toe Up Sock, and so I did that, and it is a short row heel. I did that because I just wanted the sort of experience of knitting a toe up short row heel sock. I find the heel to be too long and too pointy for my foot, so when I put it on, I have a little bit of fabric hanging off the back, and I don't love that. But I think I'm gonna give these a wash in the washing machine, and maybe they'll shrink and felt a little. And then for the other one, because I did that and was like, I don't like this, I used another free pattern by Tanis Lavallee called Old Reliable, which is a cuff down sock with a what do you call it, a heel flap and gusset. So if you're not familiar with sock terminology, the heel flap is essentially you knit down in the round to the point where you're going to add a heel, and then you work just the back stitches. You work half of the stitches flat, so you end up with this flap here. So it's flat, and it does kind of pull in just because of the way that the stitches are, it's like ribbing. And then you do a gusset by you turn the heel, you knit back, and then you pick up along that side of that flap. You pick up stitches and you continue in the round. And so as you decrease those, you get this kind of line here. This is probably the worst explanation of socks ever, and I'm sorry. I'm by no means a sock expert. I am 100% a sock novice. But I just wanted to see, if I liked this pattern better. And these are goofy Christmas socks. They don't need to even match that much. Nobody would see these amongst all my other socks and not think they went together. They're very, silly. So something I observed is that this heel flapping gusset does use up a lot more yarn, and you can tell because the stripes, when you're doing just the heel, come out in these chunks of color. So you have one chunk of red, one chunk of green, and probably two chunks of white, really. But here you have a white, green, white, red, white, and some green. I mean, it just chews up a little bit more yarn, and really you're all the way to there is kind of like that still gusset part. So you end up with, a lot more. And this one also needs to shrink up a little because these are, believe it or not, kind of big on my feet. They're so wide that they look shorter than they are, but really, I mean, this is a good length. I wear a size 7 in US women's shoes. Oh, great, I have rainbows on my face. So yeah, so these came out, just sort of a bit big, but I will say that this type of heel coming from the cuff down fits a lot better, and I think overall the cuff down sock looks a lot neater than the toe up. And that may be that I'm not as experienced, but I think I think I will probably be doing more cuff down, and I like knitting that way better. There's something weird about knitting from a closed circle, if that makes sense, like knitting from the closed end. It's just kind of strange. And I do like to rotate my stitches around when I have these rainbows. I like to rotate my stitches around on the needles so that I don't get any kind of laddering anywhere. It's not always the same stitches that are on the ends of each needle, if that makes sense. So I'm calling this done. And it's all just part of learning. Yeah. But I have to say, I cast these on because I was overwhelmed with how many projects I had. And my natural inclination then was to start something new, which doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm still feeling that way. So in this bag is the first half of my half and half triangles wrap. I still haven't figured out what color I want to make the second half, and I don't know why I'm feeling like, well, I do know why. So I have an intention to do another one that is 2 shades of blue. So I'm like really resisting the urge to make this blue, but I kind of think blue and white would look really great together, and it's my favorite color, so why not? I also think black and white would be really a great color combo, and red and white. So to everyone who suggested other colors, thank you. I think I've narrowed it down to blue, black, or red, and really it's just something I'm gonna have to sit and think about, because I don't want to knit another one that's white and something. I don't know why. I don't see a future in which I'm knitting like a dozen of these the way some people do. I think I will make one more, and it will be 2 shades of blue. So I'm really struggling with, you know, should I do a blue and white and then 2 shades of blue version? Is that weird? But I think, yeah, it's the color I'd get the most use out of, so we'll see. In this bag, in this corner, we have the beginnings of the new Blonde Shawl, which I am going to frog. So why am I going to frog this, you might ask? Pretty simply because I realize, so first of all, here's the back side of it. I love it. It's beautiful. Here's the front side of it. It's got baubles. I'm not into baubles. I don't think they add anything at this point in the pattern. So this pattern has a sort of a one long edge that looks like floral, I guess flower stalks, right? And then at the very top there are some flower buds, like flower heads, I guess. So I think I will leave the baubles up there, but I don't want them down here. I also changed bauble techniques part of the way through and ended up really, these baubles are extreme. Look at how much it sticks off. I don't get it. I don't get the bauble thing personally. I feel like, again, on the flower heads, they make sense because the whole point is that it's like, this is a Finnish word for something that's about to bloom, right? So it's like a flower bud, right? But having buds all over the stalk of the plant is weird. And also I feel like when I see baubles, I just see something that's going to snag and pull and look worse as time goes by. But I do still really like the overall look of the pattern. So I'm going to just frog back and start over and just do it without those. And I think that will be perfect, because then I will have kind of exactly what I want, and it won't slow me down so much, because the baubles really slow you down. There are a lot of them in this pattern, and yeah, I mean, they just, everything else is pretty quick. It's lace, so for me that's not time consuming or difficult. It's just kind of fun, and I do think the results are really nice. So yeah, without the baubles, I think this will, I'll be doing double time, and I will have a shawl in sometime next year. Also just want to talk about this beautiful color of yarn. Again, it's brown, but it's a purple brown. That's what I'm talking about. That's the good stuff. It almost has like coppery colors too, like almost like pink purple brown. I don't know if you can get it in the camera, but whatever. So finally, one more project that I have on the needles. Actually, no. I have 2 designs. I'm not even going to talk about those. They're coming along, but they're changing as time goes by, and you'll just have to wait and see. But the last thing I have is this sweater called Rook. I haven't made a lot of progress since a month ago, I guess. Maybe a couple inches on the body, but it's a sweater with just sort of a cable pattern down the front and down the back. And then also down the center of the top center of the sleeve. And it's a really easy to follow cable pattern. This is knit at a pretty loose gauge. I think these are size 8 needles, US size 8. So this is pretty quick going when I actually like pick it up and work on it. But I think I just want to maybe finish up the socks I'm doing and do some more, make a little more progress on my designs in progress, my dips, and then focus on this again. So, it's always just kind of like a rotating roster of projects, and this is why I never really get anything done, is because I switch from working on this one to working on that one, and everything gets a little bit of my time and energy. But I'm, kind of ending the year the way I began it, which is I have a lot of projects on the needles, and I'm gonna have to just sort of chip away at them one at a time and try to focus. I was thinking too about my most successful projects of 2021, and the ones that I really love that were really successful are some that I did kind of focus on exclusively. Projects where I sort of right-sized the challenge. I've talked about that before, about not, putting like this, for example, the all-over cable sweater. Really, if you're going to do a project like that, I think you have to think of it as not being like any other project. And, just sort of like giving yourself just enough of a challenge with a project. So, for example, I did the tea sweater, and it was, it had intarsia, but it had very little of it. And I did focus on that one start to finish and knit it pretty much monogamously. And I find that I love to wear it, but also that was like a really nice experience to just get something on the needles, focus on it, and then get it off the needles. I don't think I'm real happy having more than 2 to 3 projects going. So we'll see. Why am I doing this to myself? Okay, so that's kind of the FO and WIP roundup. I didn't give a lot of details on most of those because I've talked about them at length before in previous episodes. I'm not like a professional YouTuber who goes, and there's the link, or I don't even know what side it would be on, maybe that side. And then I have a link to a video. I think you just have to look at the show notes to figure out which one's which, because I do this as a hobby, okay? Let's talk about books. I have read quite a lot in the last couple months, and I haven't talked about books in a really long time. Part of why I didn't talk about books in a long time is because I hadn't finished anything, but it's pretty typical for me to just sort of give you an overview of sort of what I'm thinking of it at the moment, rather than, like a full book review, right? So let's talk about what I have read. I just spent like an hour trying to record this actually, and one of my neighbors has I don't know what you would call it, like a motorcycle, but like it has 3 wheels, but 2 of them are in the front. I don't know if this is like a Midwest thing or just a Milwaukee thing, but people have these weird kind of futuristic vehicles, and they just kind of like ride around playing loud music for fun. And I think he was just going around and around the block because he came to the house across the street, picked up a girl who was probably, you know, like his daughter or little sister or something. She looked pretty young. And then they were just like riding around and being very loud, playing loud music. So yeah, so I have been trying to tell you about books and getting completely sidetracked. I hope that he's gone for good. I think the girl went back into her house. I think they're done. But they were like riding up on the lawn and stuff. So these are like not like motorcycles, you know? I don't know. Anyways, they're allowed to have fun. I just can't talk at the same time as I'm hearing that. So let's get through this list of books. I'm going to start with a book that I think a lot of people in the knitting and making community have probably heard about or read. It is called Consumed, and it's by Aja Barber. Overall, I thought this book was, I guess, 2.5 out of 5 stars. I'll just start there. I think I'm going to upset some people with this review, but I want to just say it's not a criticism of Aja Barber. I do follow her on Instagram. I support her on Patreon. I am a fan. I think she's doing wonderful work educating people about their choices in fashion and how that affects the world. I think my 2 main critiques is that, one, it wasn't clear who is driving this problem, and 2, the editor just like didn't show up for work. I'm just gonna say it. I'm throwing her under the bus because because this is the worst edited thing I've ever read. So let's talk about the lack of clarity piece, because I think it's really important when you are talking about fast fashion. You know, this is a nascent field of study, right? This isn't something that is sort of like everyone already knows about it. You know, it's, you know, very formalized and professional. And so people come to it different ways and through different sort of like communities. So for me, I kind of came to it through knowing other makers who recommended a book, who then that led me to another book, and, you know, so on and so forth. So I had kind of an organic introduction to Aja Barber, and also to the idea of this you know, kind of world of people looking at and critiquing the fashion industry for its impacts on people and planet. However, I think some definitions would be helpful. So a lot of the companies that I think we all associate with fast fashion either haven't been around very long, or, you know, for whatever reason, they don't appeal, right, to maybe the average consumer. So let's talk about H&M, right? This is one that always comes up in these conversations as an example of someone who's churning out, you know, new styles every week, $5 t-shirts, etc. For someone like me, by the time H&M was doing that, I was already used to kind of a different fashion industry. I wasn't really in the like hanging out at the mall phase of life anymore, and I had like some kind of awareness that I don't need to like follow every trend or have, you know, 50 t-shirts or whatever, you know, like so it's hard for me to know where I fit in as a consumer to this sort of like, when you're challenging consumers to change their behavior, it's good to name the behaviors. But I suspect that many people do not go to, you know, these stores and buy hundreds of garments a day, right? Like that's a good example to use, but maybe throw in some other examples so that we know where to place ourselves on that. So that, like, kind of what I'm thinking is, you know, so I might go and buy a coat at, say, Columbia Sportswear or REI, right? I'm certainly not going to go buy hundreds of coats and throw them away immediately, right? Like these are the kind of things that are made to last at least a few years. I also might go and buy a pair of jeans from Eddie Bauer. Is that fast fashion? Is it not? Again, I'm not buying dozens of these a year, right? Like I probably go through 2 pairs of jeans in 2 years or something like that. You know, it's really not, which I guess is a pair of jeans a year. Anyway, it's not like every consumer is either only buying like 3 very sustainable things or like going out and buying, you know, going hog wild and just piling a cart full of clothes that are cheap. So I wish there was more clarity around like, who are you talking to, and where do I, you know, where do these sort of in between ways of shopping fit, right? Like I suspect Eddie Bauer is just as much fast fashion as H&M, just not as fast, right? Like in terms of who's making the clothes and where they're made and the supply chain issues, I have no illusions that they're somehow like very ethical because their pants cost $50 instead of $20. I still think that's really kind of like surprisingly cheap, you know, and like, yeah, I just, you know, but it's hard to tell, right? So I think, if you're going to write yet another book about this topic, I think giving people a little more clarity and guidance would be helpful instead of just sort of like saying, you know, being a mindless consumer who buys, you know, dozens of pieces of clothing a month is really bad. Well, most of us are probably not doing that. So where do we fit in? The next thing where I say the editor didn't show up for work is that there's a lot of just stylistic things in this book that are very off-putting. And I use the term stylistic generously because there are actually a lot of sentences, well, things where there's a capital letter at the beginning and a period at the end, but it's not a complete sentence. It's not a complete thought. And when that's happening on every other page, it's very hard to get through a book. And it's kind of hard to take the author's ideas seriously. So I've been an editor and I've been a writer. And as a writer, I know that every writer needs an editor. You always need your stuff edited. I don't care who you are, you need that. Your work will only improve when somebody else takes a look at it and you know, gives you some suggestions and fixes some things. And as an editor, I know that the writer's job is to get the ideas on the page and the editor's job is to clean them up and present them nicely. So, you know, Aja Barber's knowledge and ideas are not the problem here. It's totally how they're presented. Writing a clause as if it's a sentence. So for example, you have a sentence, I'll just make one up. I went to the store yesterday, the grocery store. If I wrote that on Instagram and I wrote the grocery store as a separate sentence, I think it would be forgivable. It's just not a real sentence. It's a clause that's sort of supporting the previous statement, right? So probably an M dash and then the grocery store would be better than like writing it as if it's its own sentence. But also things like a lot of pages have a sudden change of font, things that are capitalized, things that are bolded for emphasis. You know, yeah. And sometimes you get, you know, just like kind of out of nowhere, a whole lot of stuff is bolded. And I feel like it almost feels, it seems like they think the reader is stupid, right? And that the reader doesn't know what to pay attention to. And so you have to like circle it, underline it, get out a highlighter and be like, look, dummy, here it is, right? Here's the most important takeaway of this chapter. So all of that stuff is just really distracting. And I feel like there's not a ton of this information that's new to me because I follow Aja Barber. And then the parts that are new, I think, and I think there is a lot in here that is new to people who have maybe read like Elizabeth Klein or something. So there is new information in here, but the way the information is presented, it's off-putting, it's not correct in some places, like grammatically, which I think, you know, again, if I was one of the kind of academic industry gatekeepers, would I take this as seriously as it deserves to be taken? Questionable, right? And I think that a style of writing that's perfectly good for Instagram is not necessarily enough for a monograph. And so I really wish the editor had worked on the presentation of it. And then, you know, also just like from the reader's perspective, like knowing where you fit into this. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. So as much as I looked forward to this book, I feel like if you follow her on Instagram, you're not really getting a lot that's new. But you should pay people for their work. So support on Patreon if you're not going to buy the book. That's what I'll say. Let's segue right into one that I absolutely love. So How the Word is Passed. I have been savoring this book for a long time. I'm kind of picking it up, putting it down, coming back to it because it is it's a nonfiction book. The author is looking at how information about slavery and its like long-term impacts, like continuing into the present impacts, how that information is passed down outside of the public like K through 12 system. So he visits museums, he visits commemoration events, he just kind of travels around, goes to like Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's plantation, where, you know, they've kind of made that into a museum, and he talks to people who are doing some form of public history. And he also just sort of observes like a fly on the wall, like what is happening, you know, how the information is being phrased, the kind of word choices people have, you know, and whether or not the general public that shows up is getting an accurate, you know, something that could be backed up with facts kind of version of history. So it's a really beautiful book. I think it's just beautiful on so many levels. I love that it's focusing on education that happens kind of like to the public, for the public, sometimes by the public, and recognizing that as education just as much as our public schools are. Because I think we all are constantly learning whether or not we know it. And so some of us are doing that intentionally. Some people are kind of just picking things up, you know? But like, I just really love this book. And I would say it's the best book I've read all year. And I have really been reluctant to pick it back up just because I don't want it to be over. I'm like a chapter away from the end. The epilogue is like 2 pages. I just don't want to be done with it, but I think I might just finish it and then read it again because it is really, really good. And there's a lot in here. And I would say this book is kind of, for me, also something I love in books is when the author meets that perfect balance of, you know, it's well-researched and it's academic, but at the same time, it's not dry. It's like juicy. It's like the average person would want to read this, you know. I guess the average person who reads, you know, it's not like you have to be an expert in something to get into it and to understand it. So for me, it's kind of a perfectly written book. You know, every chapter is about a different historical site or event. And so you really can like read it like a collection of essays, you know. Yeah, 10 out of 10. I love this book. It's fantastic. Please read it. picked up a couple library books. So after reading Consumed, I thought I would try to read No Logo by Naomi Klein, which is something that Aja Barber had mentioned in her book. And I got it on the Libby app, and so it was an audiobook, and I listened to about a third of it, but I couldn't really get into it, and I think it's just because it's a bit older and some of the information is out of date. So it wasn't a bad book, I just wasn't really into it. It still, I think if you're really interested in the fashion industry and fast fashion and the environment, it might be worth reading, but it is very focused on kind of like the large scale production and marketing and branding and that kind of thing. So yeah. I also read the novel Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which I had been meaning to read for over a year, but I hadn't because I thought it would be sad. And I don't want to give anything away. So I'll just say, which you probably would know from reading the back of it, it's a book about multiple generations of a family. So you meet a lot of different characters who become the main character of that part of the book, and they're all, you know, like within one family tree. And I like those kind of books. And it ends on a note that leaves the reader feeling good. I won't say that it's a happy ending. I won't say that it's a sad ending. I won't say anything else, but just, you're not going to read it and then be like, ugh, I hate everything. You might just hate a lot of things, but it's so beautiful, and all the characters are so engaging that my only wish is that I had had a little more time with each of them, really. So highly recommend that book. I also read the book Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria. So let's see, I'm crossing them off my list so that I know I've talked about it. I read Against White Feminism. That one was also an audiobook. I think the title's a little bit underselling it, I guess. The book was actually really good, and it was way better than I even thought it would be. Because I think there's been a lot of social commentary about what we call like white feminism, and this wasn't like a rehash of anything. It was kind of yeah, it was really intriguing. There was a lot of stuff in there that I think really adds to and enriches the conversation. So I'll say kind of like three things that stood out to me about the book. One is the way that you know, sexuality and sexual liberation have been commodified and sold back to us as women to give the impression that sexual liberation is the only liberation that matters. And I definitely feel like, for me, growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, and you know, those were kind of like my years at which I guess media was hitting hardest. Ooh, I felt that in my bones, you know. It was really good to hear someone break it down and talk about it in that way. Number two, the way that feminism, capitalism, and globalization have become kind of like an unholy trinity, or the way that they, like, white feminism has often pitted women in the global north, or in, say, like G8 countries, against all the other women of the world, and made us see other cultures in a way that is not based in reality, but is actually through a lens of colonization and continuing colonial bias. So that was the other thing. The third thing is sort of how related to the last one, but kind of like this idea that like the Western giants of feminism have taken on such a mythical quality that to critique them is often viewed as being like anti-feminism, or you know, that if you're a woman and you don't agree with every single thing that, say, Judith Butler or Gloria Steinem said or did, or if you find that it falls short of your own experience and that there's more that needs to be said, how alienating that can be in feminist spaces. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that book. I wish the title was different, because I think just saying against white feminism makes it sound like it's just going to be a takedown of something, but there's a lot in there about how we can move forward. And I think she says it without being really prescriptive or preachy, which I really appreciated. Yeah, and I also feel like the language around the book, the reviews were really leaning on the idea of this is like a very angry book, and there's nothing wrong with women being angry. Let me be clear, we have a lot to be angry about, and anger is a normal emotion, but I wouldn't say that the overall tone of the book is one of just anger. I think it's sort of misleading and kind of selling it short to make it seem like it's just that, when it's a whole lot more. So yeah, really good book. Let's see. Okay, and then I was reading a novel called The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer, and it's one of those books that I didn't really love it, but it has stuck with me, and I keep thinking about it, and I keep thinking about some of the things that annoyed me. So I was Googling it, and I realized that there's a TV series based off of it, so I'm gonna try to watch that and see how it compares, and see if I still hate the story. You know, there's something about a certain story where you're like, okay, I don't like this, but I can't stop thinking about it. And it makes me think that maybe some part of me does like it, or I appreciate that it gives me lots of food for thought. And it didn't like just infuriate me or make me like hate it, but it just was sort of like, right. So I think I'll revisit the TV show. Another book, so I went to the Milwaukee Public Library and checked out physical books. So I am reading Knitting Yarns. I'm hitting myself in the face with it. I'm almost done with this. It's really sweet. It's just like a collection of stories by writers about their experiences with knitting. So I think if you enjoy knitting, this is a good book. And it's a really nice, gentle read. It's one of those things where sometimes maybe you need a break from things being stressful, or yeah, I don't know. It's like the full spectrum of human experience in this book, and also just kind of sweet and like not heavy. So I would recommend it. I also picked up this book, When I Was White, which is another memoir. This is by Sara Valentine. I hadn't heard of her before, but she is a woman who is has a Black father and a white mother and a white stepfather, and she grew up thinking her stepfather was her father. So she thought she was white, but she still had kind of a few experiences of being othered or feeling other and not being able to put her finger on it. So I thought this was an intriguing story from the get-go, because I think it's sort of like, it's rare that I think we get to see fully what being part of another culture feels like. So for her, growing up in a very white culture and being told you're one of us, you belong here, she has a really unique perspective. And also, I think the fact that she was purposefully alienated from her own identity, that she was not told that she was Black as a child. I think obviously there's a huge sense of loss, and there's a lot of culture that she missed out on. So you know, when we're reading about race relations, or just like reading about different kinds of experiences, I think it's really valuable to hear the experiences of people who are in some way, you know, in more than one category, or have an experience that's complicated, or you know, not straightforward. And you know, for me, as somebody who you know, I have a white mother and a Mexican father, and so always feeling like, well, yeah, I mean, technically Mexican people are white, but like, are we, you know? I think I always knew about like the differences of my identity, and what was this and what was that. And I think I also had kind of that experience of the third culture, where your family and your immediate household have a culture of its own, because it is a blend of other things. And so for me, it's very fascinating to be able to read somebody's insights into what it's like to have kind of a monocultural experience, but like someone who has since stepped back from that and can name it for what it is. Because I think people who have that experience maybe don't realize the extent to which it's different. So yeah, I've just barely started this book, but I think it's going to be really good. And it's already like really kind of like punched me in the feelings a couple times. So, okay, the last two books, I am reading a novel called The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. Here's the actual cover. I always take my dust jackets off because I feel like they just get kind of messed up. So the premise of this story is it's based kind of on a true story of this like remote town in Norway in the year 1617, where there's a huge storm and like all the men of the town are out fishing and they all get killed. So the women of the town are left kind of like grieving, but also trying to figure out how they're going to survive, because at that point, you know, like basic living tasks were really divided along gender lines. So the women have to learn how to fish, right? And they're also terrified of going out to sea because they just saw everyone they love who's male get wiped out, right? So it's about women who are trying to put the pieces of their lives back together, and how that affects their relationships with each other. But then coming into that mix is, I guess, the king or whatever decides that they need a new lensman, which as far as I can tell is kind of like a governor. And the governor is like, you know what we really need here is a witch hunter to root out all the witches. So it's at that period of time when most of Europe was engaged in some form of you know, witch craze, witch hunt, you know, murdering people who didn't conform essentially to what the authorities wanted them to be like. And so women who are just independent are already sort of, you know, suspicious. But there's also an element of kind of like cultural genocide, where the Sami are a group, they're an ethnic group that still exists in Norway, and they, at this period in time, I guess they hadn't like adopted Christianity, and they were still practicing a lot of traditional ways of living, and that was viewed as suspicious. So they are also being considered potential witches. So I put the book down a couple nights ago because it was getting really scary. But I'm gonna finish it before the end of the year for sure. I just can't read it like the last thing before bed. Yeah. So I'm loving that book. And then the final book, I just finished an audiobook called Girls to the Front, and it's a history of the Riot Girl movement. I've heard from other, well, just like looking at Goodreads and looking at other people's reviews, it's not a very complete history. But essentially, the Riot Girl movement was this sort of like punk or post-punk thing, kind of concurrent with grunge, but not exactly grunge either, in the early 90s, you know, where it was the people who started it had kind of a vision that it would be like women, you know, women and girls kind of hitting back at the patriarchy and like also starting bands. And then, of course, like all movements do, it starts to take on different forms in different places. And it's sort of a history of how that, you know, how it played out and how it maybe destroyed itself. And, you know, there's some question of, is Riot Girl over? You know, are people still making zines out there? Who knows? I mean, there was just that movie that Amy Poehler did where, you know, like teenage girls in today's world are inspired by the Riot Girl past and start making zines and posters. But it was really fascinating because I feel like that movement sort of had its heyday or was like new before I was old enough to be involved or to appreciate it. And I also see the ways in which it really fell short of, you know, speaking of white feminism, it really felt like a thing for like popular white girls to do, to be like, I'm a feminist too. So, you know, by the time I was old enough to like pay attention to that kind of thing, it just didn't really feel that authentic, I guess. And, you know, I was thinking, this book got me thinking about how, you know, imposter syndrome has become such a buzzword, and like so many people talk about it now. And I wonder, do we all have imposter syndrome because in the 90s everyone called everyone a poser? Like, do you remember when being a poser was like the worst thing and nobody really knew what it meant, but everybody was like, you're a poser, you're a poser. Anyway, the book got me thinking, and I think you know, it's a good one for an audiobook because you can kind of listen to it while you're driving or something. It's not the most important information you're ever going to receive, but it's very interesting. And I think it's really neat that somebody took the time to write a book about a very small like subculture and really a very narrow window of time. Really, the book covers about 4 years of history. So talk about a really good micro history, right? Okay, that's it for books. I want to talk a little bit about the coming year and my plans for it. So I mentioned in my last episode that I'm gonna have 2 kind of knit along, make alongs. So I wanna just kind of clarify a little bit about each of those. So the first one is Knit Blue 2022. This is a knit along. I am going to be knitting blue things all year long. So all you have to do to participate is knit something blue. Share it, use the hashtag, tag me in your picture, or send me a, you know, if you don't know how to like get my attention with it, just comment below and I'll figure it out, right? Depending on what platforms you use. But I want, you know, I want it to be really simple. Just knit something blue. That's all you have to do. At the end of the year, I will pick a random project and give the person who made it a prize. The prize will probably be like a gift card to an online yarn store, because I really, sometimes I try to curate prizes and make a good prize package, but sometimes I'm just like, I'll just give you whatever you want, right? So you can choose, right? And that's kind of it. So that one, the hashtag will just be hashtag knitblue2022, really simple. And the second one is a make along. It's much more general because it is called Renew and Improve. So the idea of this is just to take something that you own currently and give it a new lease on life. It could be really anything. You could embroider on something, you can over dye something, you can, you know, completely transform something or do a very minor repair. It doesn't matter. But the point is I've been thinking a lot about how do we encourage sustainability and develop those habits. And I think that most of us don't have the habit of like darning socks and, you know, kind of like in the olden days when people had to make their cloth last longer, they would make the most of it. And so, you know, from an environmental standpoint, that's really the best thing we could do, right? Is to take, you know, every scrap of fabric that comes into our lives, whether it's something we knitted or something we sewed or even just something we purchased, and just try to get the most life out of it. And also to take it from one part of its life cycle to another. So it may be, you know, a shirt that becomes part of a quilt, for instance, or I've been really intrigued by the concept of rag rugs because I feel like they used to be everywhere and now I never see them. So yeah, so that's a much more generalized make along. Same deal in terms of use the hashtag, tag me. Let me know you know, through a YouTube comment or whatever, if you're trying to get my attention, and I will put you in, you know, on the list that later I will randomly choose a winner from. And I don't know yet what the prize will be for that, but, I'll be trying to think of something. So if you have any suggestions of like, wow, you know, it would be a great prize, because I think for that, it could be a gift card to a fabric store or to a art supply store, or, you know, like the possibilities are endless. Or maybe that's one where I want to actually like curate a prize package. And because I do, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of a, what do I want to do, right? Other 2022 plans that I have, I do plan on doing kind of like a deep dive on socks. So I talked earlier about, you know, I did a pair where one was toe up and one was cuff down. And I did another pair with an afterthought heel, and I like the afterthought heel strategy most of all. I think my favorite way to knit a sock is cuff down with an afterthought heel because I get a heel that fits well. It feels a little more customizable for my feet. And I find that my gauge is a lot more even when I'm just kind of knitting a tube versus the heel flap and gusset. But I want to do kind of a deeper dive and try a few different constructions and patterns. And I also have quite a stash now of sock yarn where I deliberately bought a single skein thinking it would become a pair of socks. So I want to do a lot of like learning about socks in the coming year. So if I can't do Rhinebeck in the coming year, it'll be the Wisconsin sheep and wool. I'm hopeful that there's, you know, just going to be some kind of festival in my future. And I'm really looking forward to being able to kind of indulge in that like unexpected purchase, like unplanned, because I am such a planner that I have to plan my unplanned experiences. So yeah. The other thing is I also, just in the interest of using up what I have, I'm going to try really hard not to buy yarn that I'm not going to cast on right away. I feel like that's a fair place to land. If I don't have the bandwidth to cast on right away, I shouldn't buy that yarn. And it's funny because I usually buy patterns right before I start the pattern. So I already kind of do that with patterns, but for whatever reason, I'm really good at letting myself just buy yarn and then just let it sit there, even when it's something that is readily accessible all the time. and you know, there's no fear of like missing out. It's just like, I want it right now, you know. So I think I need to like, you know, slow my roll with purchasing, because as you can see, I have whip overload right now. And related to that, I am going to try to take a break from social media in the beginning of the year. It's a, you know, kind of trite maybe to just be like, I'm going to have a New Year's reset, but I think I need to get away from Instagram. I think I need to get away from constantly filling my head with images of what other people are making, or, you know, seeing all the new patterns that are coming out. And then also just like a lot of the negative aspects of social media. I don't have to spell them out, but I think it might be time for me to just like take a break and try to rediscover the private joy of crafting, if that makes sense. Yeah, I knitted pretty much in isolation for a few years before I discovered the world of knitting, so to speak. And I was happy doing it. And there's nothing wrong with connecting to other people, but you know, going to a local knit night here, and I've had a few hangouts with knitter friends here, and it's really got me thinking about how different it is to have like real life in-person interactions. I don't want to say real life, because what happens on the internet is real life too, but you know, to have in-person interactions, and how it's kind of freeing, right? To not worry about what's happening in the world beyond the project right in front of you. So yeah, that's kind of what my coming year is probably going to look like. I need to end this video because it's very long and I had no intention of it being this long, but here we are. And I hope that you have a really great end of the year. Happy solstice, happy Christmas, happy New Year's, happy winter. And yeah, the days are just gonna start getting longer now, so yay. I hope that you have a really wonderful new year, and I look forward to seeing you in January. All right, bye.